You are watching DHTV from California State University, Dominguez Hills.
Now, Murrow's last major TV milestone was reporting and narrating a CBS report called Harvest of Shame. It was a report on the plight of migrant farm workers in the United States. The film was directed by Fred W. Friendly, and it was produced by David Lowe. And the program originally aired just after Thanksgiving Day in November of 1960. So it's most appropriate. Thanksgiving is coming around the corner. Now, the December 5th, 1960 edition of Time magazine quoted producer Lowe as saying, "We felt that by scheduling the program the day after Thanksgiving, we could stress the fact that much of the food cooked for Thanksgiving throughout the country was picked by migratory workers. We hoped that the pictures of how these people live and work would shock the consciousness of the nation." So let's go to a film clip that introduces the documentary.
Over here, 7 cents. All day talking. Over here, 7 cents today. We're paying today. We're paying more than anybody in town. 7 cents, heavier today. 70 cents today. 70 cents. 70 cents all day jumping. All I can do is value. $8 and you guarantee you if you pull today and we pull what we got to pull today, you'll have $11 in your pocket.
This is not taking place in the Congo. It has nothing to do with Johannesburg or Cape Town. It is not Nyasaland or Nigeria. This is Florida. These are citizens of the United States, 1960. This is a shape-up for migrant workers. The hawkers are chanting the going peace rate at the various fields. This is the way the humans who harvest the food for the best-fed people in the world get hired. One farmer looked at this and said, "We used to own our slaves. Now we just rent them." The Secretary of Labor looked at the migrant plight and said,
"I think they're the great mass of what I've called the excluded Americans. They are people who cry out, the workers and their children and their wives, who cry out for some assistance and whose plight is a shame. It's a shame in America."
The president of the American Farm Bureau Federation, the largest farmers organization, says,
"I think that most social workers would agree that it's better for a man to be employed, even if his capacity is such as to limit his income. And we take the position that it's far better to have thousands of these folks who are practically unemployable, earning some money, doing some productive work for at least a few days in the year."
This is an American story that begins in Florida and ends in New Jersey and New York State with the harvest. It is a 1960 Grapes of Wrath that begins at the Mexican border in California and ends in Oregon and Washington. It is the story of men and women and children who work 136 days of the year and average $900 a year. They travel in buses. They ride trucks. They follow the sun.
Well, I don't know. It don't look like we'll ever get ahead. I guess we'll just have to keep going till we can find something better.
A minister named Cassidy, who works with them, says,
"They are just as bad as the slaves. Only on name they are not the slaves, but in the way they are treated, they are worse than the slaves. And somebody has to make thousands of dollars out of his sweat. Is that a slave or not?"
They are the migrants, workers in the sweatshops of the soil, the harvest of shame.
Brought to you tonight by Philip Morris Incorporated, makers of Marlboro, filter cigarette with the unfiltered taste. Now, Edward R. Murrow.
This is CBS Reports, Harvest of Shame. It has to do with the men, women, and children who harvest the crops in this country of ours, the best fed nation on earth. These are the forgotten people, the underprotected, the undereducated, the underclothed, the underfed. We present this report of Thanksgiving because were it not for the labor of the people you are going to meet, you might not starve, but your table would not be laden with the luxuries that we have all come to regard as essentials. We should like you to meet some of your fellow citizens who harvest the food for the best fed nation on earth.
David Lowe talks to Mrs. Doby, 34 years old, mother of 9 children.
Mrs. Doby, what things do you pick up north?
We pick strawberries and cherries.
Who works with you out of this family here?
Everybody except the baby.
Who takes care of them in the field?
Well, they just kindly stay along with us or take care of themselves. The one that can't walk usually stays in the baby buggy.
What is an average dinner for the family?
Well, you mean what do we have in...
Yes.
I cook a pot of beans and fry some potatoes or some corn or something like that.
How many quarts of milk do you buy for the children, Mrs.
Well, we don't have milk except maybe when we draw our paycheck, we have milk about once a week.
For all these children you have
The
milk?
baby has, she is on the bottle and she uses about 15 cans of milk a week, but the older children have milk about once a week.
Do they like to drink milk, Mrs. Doby?
Yes, they like milk.
The only reason I asked that question, I was quite shocked that they had milk only once a week.
Just thought they didn't like it, but they like milk, but there's so many, a gallon of milk will make them a glass around, and so we just can't afford it every day.
What do you want most for your children, Mrs. Doby?
Well, I'd like for them to have a career, whatever they want to be when they got older. Of course, the smaller ones, don't realize yet to know what they'd like to be. But the older girl, she'd like to go to school if she could. Of course, she'll probably be like the boy, have to quit as soon as she's old enough. She really likes to go to school, but she had to miss last week because she had to keep the baby for me to work.
Mrs. Doby, wouldn't you ever care to have a house of your own?
I'd like to have a house if we plan to buy one. If we could ever get enough to pay down on one, we'd buy one.
Do you think this will ever happen?
Well, it don't seem like it.
Again, this is a very powerful documentary that hit, that everyone was watching after Thanksgiving, the day of Thanksgiving. If you remember what the interviewer was asking Miss Doty is what do you have for dinner? She had no concept of what dinner was. You mean what do we eat? Again, there was no such thing as breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's just, you mean what do we eat? Again, Murrow's opening was voiced over footage of migrant workers, including a number of African Americans being recruited. And it's worth repeating since Murrow wasn't afraid of being controversial. He shared that the scene is not taking place in the Congo. It has nothing to do with Johannesburg and Cape Town. It is not Nyasaland or Nigeria. This is Florida. These are citizens of the United States. This is a shape-up for migrant workers. The hawkers are chanting the going peace rate at the various fields. And this is the way that humans who harvest the food for the best fed people in the world get hired. One farmer looked at this and said, we used to own our slaves, now we just rent them. So let's go to the film's conclusion and let's appreciate how Murrow assessed the plight of the migrant worker. Because Murrow's closing words are that the migrants have no lobby, that only an enlightened, aroused, and perhaps angered public opinion can do anything about the migrants. And the people that you have seen have the strength to harvest your fruits and vegetables. They do not have the strength to influence legislation. Maybe we do. Good night and good luck. Let's go back to the conclusion of that documentary.
The question posed by thoughtful men is, must the 2 to 3 million migrants who help feed their fellow Americans work, travel, and live under conditions that wrong the dignity of man? Howard Van Smith, awarded a Pulitzer Prize for his series of articles on migrant labor in the Miami News, says this.
I knew next to nothing of the migrant situation 4 to 5 years ago. I knew there were migrant camps, but a migrant was just a person who worked in a farm to me. After seeing what I have, I am sure that I will devote the rest of my life to doing what little I can to help solve this problem.
Secretary of Labor James Mitchell says,
I feel sad. I feel sad because I think that it's a blot on my conscience as well as the conscience of all of us who are, whom society has treated a little more favorably than these people. They have no voice in the legislative halls. They certainly have no voice in Congress. And their employers do have a voice. Their employers are highly organized and make their wants and terms and conditions known to our legislators. I know of no greater pressure lobby, so-called, in Washington than the Farm Group. In all the matters in which I am interested in, I have been frustrated to a greater extent than in any other sphere of activity as Secretary of Labor in my inability to make any impact at all in terms of either regulations or law that would help the farm workers. And the pressures of the farm groups are tremendous. We guarantee to the farmer no loss in certain crops. There the farmer likes to participate in the government largesse. But Lord help the fellow like myself who dares suggest that perhaps the government should do something about the workers that work on farms. It seems to me that in our kind of a country, we no longer quarrel with the idea that a man is worthy of his hire, a fair day's work for a fair day's pay. After all, the employers of this country, as indeed the workers, are part of our way of life, and it's morally wrong, it seems to me, for any man, any employer, to exploit his workers. In this day and age, I don't think we should tolerate it. As a citizen, in or out of this office, I propose to continue to raise my voice until the country recognizes that it has an obligation to do something for them.
and while men of goodwill seek to right injustice, the migrant, the lonely wanderer, the outcast, is trapped in the stream. Now it is November. The last of the laborers, in trucks, buses, and cars, approach the southern states to start the cycle all over again. The Sunshine State welcomes them back. Homestead, Immokalee, Pahokee, Belglade, and hundreds of other communities. This is home. New housing is available. The rent, $15 per room per week. The migrant is at the mercy of the weather. This year in Florida, there was a freeze, killing beans, tomatoes, celery, corn. Its byproduct was a bread line. Migratory farm workers are not eligible for unemployment insurance. This happened in the United States in 1960. A line of humans waiting for a ration of tinned goods, milk and bread. The Secretary of Labor says, "For the rest of my life, in or out of office, I propose to do something for them." A hardened newspaper man says, "For the rest of my life, I will do what little I can to help." But perhaps Julian Griggs, a chaplain for the migrants, speaks for all of us.
Is it possible to have love without justice? Is it possible that we think too much in terms of charity, in terms of Thanksgiving Day baskets, in terms of Christmas baskets, and not in terms enough of eliminating poverty?
The migrants are back in Belgrade, winter quarters, after months of travel and work. One said he brought back $1.65, another said $6. Another said we broke even. We were broke when we left, broke when we got back. We asked them what they thought they could do to help themselves, and they said nothing. What can we do? Last week, a presidential committee made up of the Secretaries of Labor, Agriculture, Interior, and Health, Welfare, and Education made certain recommendations regarding the migrants. Here are some of them. Extend child labor laws to cover agricultural workers. Eliminate residence requirements so that migrants will be eligible for health, education, and welfare programs. A federal law requiring crew leaders to register, thus protecting migrants from exploitation. Extension of workmen's compensation laws to agriculture. New housing regulations. States to pay local school boards for the education of migrant children. There will, of course, be opposition to these recommendations. Too much government interference, too expensive, socialism. Similar proposals have been made before. In fact, 150 different attempts have been made in Congress to do something about the plight of the migrants. All except one has failed. The migrants have no lobby. Only an enlightened, aroused, and perhaps angered public opinion can do anything about the migrants. The people you have seen have the strength to harvest your fruit and vegetables. They do not have the strength to influence legislation. Maybe we do. Good night and good luck.
Again, this was a very powerful documentary that was instrumental in getting public opinion to address the issues of the migrant farm workers, especially with regards to the issues used over the Bracero program. And so over the years, an awareness developed on the plight of the migrant farm workers, and it leads us to a very important personage, and that is Cesar Chavez, and the organization that was founded by him and Dolores Huerta, known as the United Farm Workers. Now, Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta are important because through their organizational struggle of the United Farm Workers, they exposed to the national public the use of the Bracero program to deny the civil rights of those present in the U.S. But it was Edward Morrow's Harvest of Shame that preconditioned the public debate. Now, Cesar Chavez is important because under his leadership, the guest worker program was exposed for what it truly means. It was a way to use international contract labor identified as guest worker programs to break union organizing activities. And again, all of this within the communist sphere. You know, whip up the frenzy and your rights are out the window. Deport Mexican union organizers, import immigrant strike breakers. Let's go to a remembrance of Chavez.
Cesar Estrada Chavez, an American civil rights activist and labor leader, was born in Yuma, Arizona on March 31st, 1927. The Chavez family lost their Arizona homestead in the Great Depression and in the late 1930s moved to Northern California.
Cesar and his family became migrant farm workers thrust into the industrialized agriculture of California.
Cesar dropped out of school after the 8th grade to help support his family by working in the fields.
Caesar joined the Navy right after World War II, and he saw places he never would have seen. So it did open his eyes up to the world very much.
After the Navy, Chavez returned to the fields and became a grassroots organizer for a Latino civil rights group. He then left the group and formed the National Farm Workers Association, now known as the United Farm Workers of America, with the goal of unionizing farm workers.
Caesar believed that the movement he founded had to be more than just a union that was solely concerned with improving wages, hours, and working conditions, although the UFW certainly did that. But it also needed to address the crippling dilemmas that farm workers face in the community after they came home from work.
Most people were poor. They didn't have access to good housing or health care or education.
Chavez was adamant that his new union follow a strict policy of using only nonviolent tactics as a means of negotiation. While the organization was still in its infancy, UFW embarked upon one of the most influential boycotts in U.S. history, the boycott of all California table grapes.
The grape boycott really took off in '68. Caesar had studied history. He knew that for 100 years, farm worker strikes were brutally crushed, and that the agricultural industry, which in California is one of the richest, most powerful industries in the state, controlled much of rural California. So what Caesar needed to do was take the fight from the fields, where the odds were stacked against the farm workers, and move it to the cities, where the farm workers at least had a chance.
Over the next few years, led by Cesar Chavez, the farm workers would boycott, protest, march, and fast their way to a collective bargaining agreement, which guaranteed field workers, among other things, increased pay and the right to unionize.
He was responsible for a lot of the labor codes that we see today, the protections, the benefits, but the basic right to organize and affiliate.
As the head of the United Farm Workers of America, labor rights was not the only cause championed by Chavez.
Caesar's commitment to social justice went far beyond the farm workers. In the 1960s, he was a strong and vocal opponent of the Vietnam War. In the 1970s, Caesar was an early and vocal supporter of gay rights. Also not a popular position, especially at that time, among his own constituency.
Cesar Chavez died in his sleep on April 23, 1993. He was survived by his wife Helen, their 8 children, and 31 grandchildren. In 1994, he was posthumously awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Bill Clinton.
In 1975, there was a reporter with a national news magazine following Caesar around for several days, rallies, marches, picket lines. And in an interview, she asked him what accounts for all the affection and respect that farm workers show you in public. And Caesar paused for a moment, and then he smiled his easy smile, and he said, "The feeling is mutual."
Okay, so, and again, connecting labor organizing to immigration has always been a contentious issue. And the United Farm Workers and Cesar Chavez was no different, because it continues to this day. But especially as we witness immigrants protesting for their rights these last few years, that they have encouraged organized labor to reclaim May Day as an international day of solidarity. But what Edward Morrow in the 1950s and what Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez in the 1950s and into the 1960s were able to do was connect the urban communities to the plight of the farm worker throughout the United States and specifically here in California. So in the next presentation, we will be dealing with the civil rights movement.